She was just a maid, but one forbidden night left her carrying the Mafia boss's baby, and now she's forever protected. But as danger closes in, will his protection be enough? Or will it destroy her? The morning light filtered through the towering windows of the Moretti mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Amelia meticulously polished each day. Her feather duster moved with practiced precision over the collection of Ming vases that probably cost more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes. She paused, catching her reflection in one of the gilded mirrors that lined the hallway. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another restless night, spent trying not to think about him. About Luke. A door slammed somewhere in the mansion's east wing, making her jump. Her heart raced as heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. "Please don't let it be him," she silently prayed, though she couldn't tell if the flutter in her stomach was from fear or something else entirely. Amelia busied herself with dusting the same spot over and over, keeping her eyes down as voices grew closer. The other maids had warned her about Luciano Moretti, how he could make someone disappear with just a phone call, how the blood on his hands would never wash clean. "Just a maid," she whispered to herself, a mantra she repeated whenever her thoughts strayed to the way his dark eyes seemed to follow her. "You're just a maid." The footsteps passed by without stopping, but she caught a whiff of his cologne, spicy and expensive, like everything else in this house. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved to the next antique, careful not to break anything that could cost her more than her life savings. The mansion felt like a beautiful cage, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors stained with secrets she didn't want to know about. Yet somehow, she'd found herself trapped here, drawn to the danger that lurked beneath the luxury like a moth to a flame. As Amelia worked her way through the mansion's east wing, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her movements were practiced, efficient, each sweep of her cloth against the antique furniture a familiar dance she'd perfected over the past year. She knew every inch of this mansion, every creaking floorboard and hidden corner. More importantly, she knew when to make herself scarce. The other maids whispered about what happened to people who crossed Luciano Moretti, their words hushed and eyes wide with fear. Amelia had seen enough herself to know the whispers weren't just gossip. A crystal vase caught the sunlight, and she paused to polish it, her reflection distorted in its surface. Dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, simple black uniform pressed and clean. Everything about her designed to blend into the background. That's where she belonged. That's where she was safe. But sometimes, in moments she wouldn't admit to anyone, she felt his eyes on her. Those dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained facade. They made her pulse quicken and her hands shake, and she hated herself for it. Luciano Moretti was dangerous. Everyone knew that. The blood on his hands didn't wash off, no matter how expensive his suits were. The sound of voices drew her attention to the study. The door was ajar, and through the gap, she could see him. Luke stood behind his massive desk, his broad shoulders tense as he spoke in low, clipped tones to two men in dark suits. Even from here, she could feel the barely contained violence in his stance. Then, as if he sensed her presence, his gaze snapped up and met hers through the doorway. Time seemed to stop, the air crackling with something she didn't dare name. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss slipped, revealing something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. Amelia quickly looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hurried down the hallway, her cleaning cart forgotten. But she could still feel the weight of his gaze, like a physical touch against her skin. What terrified her most wasn't the danger he represented. It was how alive she felt in that single moment when their eyes met, and how much she craved feeling that way again. Amelia's heart thudded against her ribs as she made her way down the dimly lit hallway toward Luke's study. The mansion felt different at night. Darker. More dangerous. The usual bustle of staff was absent, leaving only the whisper of her footsteps against the marble floor. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. When she pushed open the heavy oak door, her breath caught in her throat. Luke stood by his desk, his usual immaculate appearance disheveled. His white shirt was stained with crimson, and a cut above his eye dripped blood down his chiseled face. "Close the door," he commanded, his voice rough. Amelia's fingers trembled as she did what he asked. She'd never seen him like this, vulnerable, wounded. The great Luciano Moretti, who made grown men cower with a single look, was bleeding in front of her. "Mr. Moretti, you need a doctor." No doctors. He cut her off, dark eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "You'll help me." She swallowed hard, watching as he shrugged off his jacket with a barely concealed wince. "I'm just a maid, I don't—" "You're the only one here I can trust right now." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Amelia moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The metallic scent of blood mixed with his expensive cologne made her head spin. As she approached, she noticed how his shoulders tensed, like a wounded animal ready to strike. "There's a first aid kit in the drawer," he said, gesturing to his desk. Her fingers brushed against his as she took the kit from his hand, and electricity shot through her body. This close, she could see the muscle in his jaw working, the way his chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. For the first time, Luciano Moretti seemed human. Dangerous still, but human. And that made him more dangerous than ever. The study was dark, except for a single lamp, casting long shadows across Luke's broad shoulders as he stood by the window. Blood had soaked through his white shirt, and even in the dim light, Amelia could see the tight clench of his jaw. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she hesitated in the doorway. "Come here." His voice was cold steel, leaving no room for argument. Amelia's legs carried her forward before her mind could catch up. The first aid kit felt heavy in her trembling hands. "Sir, maybe we should call—" "No one else." He cut her off, dark eyes fixed on her. "Just you." She swallowed hard and set the kit down on his desk. When she turned back, he had shed his jacket, the movement making him wince. Without thinking, she stepped closer to help him with his shirt buttons. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, stopping her. "Careful, little maid." The warning in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "You don't know what you're getting into." "You're hurt," she whispered, meeting his gaze. "Let me help you." Something flickered in his eyes' surprise, maybe before he released her. The buttons came undone under her shaking fingers, revealing tanned skin and the angry gash across his ribs. As she cleaned the wound, she felt his muscles tense beneath her touch. The silence between them crackled with electricity. She tried to keep her movements clinical, professional, but every brush of skin against skin felt like fire. "Why are you different?" His question was so quiet she almost missed it. She looked up, startled to find his face inches from hers. His breath was warm against her cheek, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "I'm not," she managed. "I'm just a maid?" His hand came up to cup her face. "No. You're much more dangerous than that." Before she could process his words, she was pressing her lips to his. The kiss was desperate, hungry everything she'd been holding back for months. His response was immediate and overwhelming, pulling her against him with a growl that should have frightened her, but only made her want more. "Tell me to stop," he demanded against her mouth, but his hands were already sliding down her back, claiming her. She couldn't. She didn't want to. Instead, she kissed him harder, losing herself in the taste of danger and desire. That night, in the darkness of his study, everything changed. Every touch, Every kiss was a line being crossed, a rule being broken. But as Luke's hands and lips mapped every inch of her skin, Amelia couldn't bring herself to care about the consequences, not when this felt so desperately right. The first rays of morning light filtered through the heavy silk curtains, rousing Amelia from her sleep. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the Egyptian cotton sheets against her bare skin. Then reality crashed over her like an icy wave. This wasn't her small bedroom in the servants' quarters. This was Luke's room. Her heart hammered against her ribs as fragments of the previous night flooded back. His hands on her skin, his lips trailing fire down her neck. The way he'd whispered her name like a prayer and a curse all at once. Heat crept up her cheeks as she remembered how eagerly she'd responded to his touch, how completely she'd surrendered to him. The space beside her was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. Of course he was gone. What had she expected? She was just the maid who'd been convenient when he needed comfort. Stupid, 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 she muttered, sitting up and wrapping the sheet around herself. Her uniform lay crumpled on the floor, a stark reminder of the line she'd crossed. The line they'd crossed. Her fingers trembled as she gathered her clothes, every muscle in her body aching with the memory of his touch. The room still smelled of him. Expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. Just like the man himself, Amelia dressed quickly, trying to ignore how the silk sheets had felt against her skin, how safe she'd felt in his arms, despite knowing exactly what those hands were capable of. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. She was nothing to him, just another conquest, another body to warm his bed. But as she slipped out of his room, her heart refused to believe what her mind knew to be true, because for just one night, Luciano Moretti had made her feel like she was everything. Amelia moved through the mansion like a ghost, her mind replaying fragments of last night over and over. The weight of Luke's hands on her skin, the heat of his breath against her neck, the way he'd looked at her in those dark hours like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. She dusted the same vase 3 times before catching herself. Her hands trembled as she gripped the feather duster tighter, trying to focus on anything but the memories that kept flooding back. "Get it together," she whispered to herself. It was one night. That's all. But it wasn't just one night. It was crossing a line she could never uncross. She was a maid, and he was Luciano Moretti. The thought of his name alone made her stomach clench. The morning dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. She jumped at every sound, expecting to see him around every corner. But he stayed away, and somehow that was worse. When he finally appeared, it was like a storm rolling in. Amelia was cleaning the library when she heard his footsteps. Those familiar, measured steps that always made her heart race. She kept her eyes down, pretending to be absorbed in her work. Miss Cruz. His voice was ice, nothing like the way he'd said her name last night, rough with need and something deeper. She forced herself to look up, meeting his cold stare. "Sir?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Luke stood there in an immaculate suit, not a hair out of place. If it weren't for the slight bruising along his jaw, there'd be no sign of what had happened between them. "What happened last night stays between us." His words cut through the air like a knife. "No one is to know. Understood?" Amelia's chest tightened. She'd expected this, but it still hurt. "Of course, sir. I wouldn't." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like regret. But then it was gone, replaced by that familiar mask of indifference. Amelia watched him go, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She'd been a fool to think one night could change anything. She was still just the maid, and he was still the monster everyone feared. But as she returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Something that neither of them could take back, no matter how hard they tried to pretend it never happened. The morning sickness hit Amelia like a tidal wave. She barely made it to the bathroom, her hands trembling as she gripped the pristine porcelain. This was the third morning in a row, and she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, she counted the days in her head again. Her period was 2 weeks late. The realization made her stomach churn even more, though this time it wasn't from nausea. "No," she whispered to herself. "This can't be happening." But it was. The fatigue that dragged at her limbs, the way certain smells now made her dizzy, the tenderness in her breasts. All the little changes she'd tried to dismiss were adding up to one terrifying conclusion. She pushed herself up from the floor, catching her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, dark circles lingering under her eyes. The girl, staring back at her, looked scared, lost. She hardly recognized herself. Down the hall, she heard footsteps, heavy, measured ones she'd learned to identify. Luke. Her heart jumped into her throat. Since their night together, he'd barely looked at her, treating her with a cold indifference that hurt more than she wanted to admit. But now, Amelia quickly splashed water on her face and straightened her uniform. She couldn't let him see her like this. Couldn't let anyone know that her world was falling apart. As she stepped into the hallway, Luke emerged from his study. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Amelia felt that familiar pull. The dangerous attraction that had led them here in the first place. He looked away first, his jaw tight, but not before she caught something in his expression. Something that made her wonder if he was as affected by their night together as she was. But it didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except the growing certainty in her gut. She was carrying the Mafia boss's baby, and her life would never be the same. Through the narrow window of her bathroom, pale morning light cast long shadows across the tile floor. Amelia's hands shook as she stared at the plastic stick on the counter, willing the second pink line to disappear. But it didn't. It stayed there, bold and unmistakable, changing her life forever. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her palm against her stomach. The nausea that had plagued her for days suddenly made terrible sense. She sank to the cold floor, her back against the wall. Pregnant, with Luke Moretti's baby. The thought alone made her dizzy. She'd seen what happened to people who crossed him, heard the whispered stories of his brutality. Yet she'd also felt the gentleness of his touch that night, seen a glimpse of something human beneath his cold exterior. Amelia pushed herself up and splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale and scared. She could run, take what little money she had and disappear. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it was impossible. Luke's reach extended far beyond these walls. He had eyes everywhere, connections that could find her no matter where she went. "What am I going to do?" she asked her reflection. But the terrified woman staring back had no answers. Her hands trembled as she wrapped the pregnancy test in toilet paper and stuffed it deep into a trash bag. The evidence was hidden, but the truth couldn't be erased. Inside her, a new life was growing, half her, half him. A child that would bind her forever to one of the most dangerous men in the city. Amelia gripped the edges of the sink, studying herself one last time in the mirror. Her mother had always told her that life's biggest changes came without warning. Now here she was, a maid carrying a mafia boss's baby. "Once I tell him," she whispered to herself, "everything changes." The words hung heavy in the small bathroom. There was no going back, no pretending this wasn't happening. She was carrying Luke Moretti's child, and soon he would know too. Amelia's heart thundered against her ribs as she stepped into the grand hallway. The marble floors seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each step echoing like a countdown to her fate. Ahead, Luke stood by the massive stone fireplace, his broad shoulders tensed as he spoke in low tones to one of his men. The moment she entered, his dark eyes snapped to her. Even from across the room, his gaze held such intensity that it nearly stopped her in her tracks. She watched as his jaw tightened, that familiar mask of control sliding into place. "Leave us," he commanded his associate without breaking eye contact with Amelia. The man disappeared without a word, his footsteps fading into silence. Amelia's fingers twisted in the fabric of her simple black dress, her palms damp with sweat. The crackling fire was the only sound in the room as Luke waited, patient as a predator. "Mr. Moretti," she began, hating how her voice trembled. "I need to speak with you." Something flickered across his face. Recognition of the formality she used. Perhaps when just weeks ago she'd whispered his name in the darkness of his bedroom. "Speak then." His voice was cold, detached, but his eyes never left her face. Amelia took a shaky breath. The words felt like glass in her throat, but she forced them out. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Luke's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white where they gripped the mantle of the fireplace. When he finally moved, it was with the fluid grace of a hunter, closing the distance between them in long, measured strides. He stopped mere inches from her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're certain?" Amelia nodded, unable to find her voice under the weight of his stare. Her heart raced as she waited for his reaction, for the anger or dismissal she feared would come. Amelia's heart thundered against her ribs as she stood before Luke in the grand hallway. The marble floors felt cold beneath her feet, matching the icy dread that had settled in her stomach. She waited until his associate left before stepping forward, her hands trembling at her sides. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke turned from the fireplace, his dark eyes fixing on her with predatory focus. "Speak," she drew in a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Amelia braced herself for his reaction, for rage, for dismissal, for anything but the eerie stillness that followed. Luke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He studied her with the same calculating look he used when planning his business dealings, as if she were a chess piece he needed to position correctly. "How certain are you?" His voice was low, controlled. "I took 3 tests," she whispered. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. Amelia fought the urge to step back as he towered over her, his presence overwhelming. "Then, from this moment on, you belong to me," he said, his words clipped and precise. "You will stay here, under my protection. This child isn't just mine, it's the future of my empire." Amelia's mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." He cut her off. "You need to accept. In my world, an heir means power. It means loyalty. And it means that anyone who threatens you becomes my enemy." His hand came up to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "And my enemies don't survive long." The possessive touch sent shivers down her spine. This wasn't just about the baby. This was about ownership, about control. She was no longer just a maid who'd shared his bed. She was carrying his legacy. "You can't just—" she started. "I can." "I will." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gesture somehow both tender and threatening. You're mine now, Amelia. Both of you are. And I protect what's mine." As his words sank in, Amelia realized there was no escape from this moment. From him. From the dangerous world she'd stumbled into. She wasn't just carrying Luke's child, she was carrying the heir to a criminal empire, and her life would never be the same. The golden morning light filtered through the heavy silk curtains of Luke's private wing as Amelia stood in what was now her room. Her few belongings looked out of place among the opulent furnishings. Her worn duffel bag, a stark contrast to the antique dresser it rested against. She ran her fingers along the expensive bedding, still unable to believe this was real. Just days ago, she'd been cleaning rooms like this. Now, she was living in one. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her tense. Through the partially open door, she caught glimpses of Luke's men patrolling their dark suits and watchful eyes, a constant reminder that she wasn't just a guest here. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. "Everything to your satisfaction?" Luke's deep voice startled her. He filled the doorway, his presence commanding as always. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now. His dark eyes lingered on her stomach, though there was nothing to see yet. "I don't need all this," Amelia said quietly, gesturing to the luxurious room. "I could stay in my old quarters." "No." His tone left no room for argument. "You're carrying my child. Things are different now." Amelia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small under his intense gaze. "Different how? Am I supposed to just sit here and be watched all day?" A muscle ticked in Luke's jaw. "You'll be protected. There are people who would use you to get to me." He stepped closer, and Amelia forced herself not to back away. "You don't understand the world you're in now, Amelia. But you will." The threat wasn't in his words, but in what he left unsaid. As he turned to leave, Amelia caught her reflection in the ornate mirror, a simple girl in simple clothes, standing in a room fit for a queen. But she knew the truth. She wasn't royalty. She was a possession now, one that Luke intended to keep safe at any cost. Amelia paced the luxurious confines of Luke's private wing, her fingertips trailing along the mahogany walls. Everything around her screamed wealth and power, from the crystal chandeliers to the Italian marble floors. But all she felt was trapped. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in!" she called, wrapping her arms around herself. Matteo entered, his presence as quiet and deadly as always. He was Luke's most trusted enforcer, a shadow that moved with lethal grace. "Miss Cruz," he said, his voice low and controlled. "The boss wanted me to check on you." "I'm fine," she replied, lifting her chin, "though I'd be better if I wasn't treated like a prisoner in a golden cage." Matteo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "Then explain it to me," Amelia challenged, tired of being kept in the dark. He moved to the window, scanning the grounds below with practiced precision. "Luke, he's not just any man. The empire he controls, the enemies he's made, they would tear you apart to get to him." He turned to face her. "And now, carrying his child, you're the perfect target." Amelia's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "I never asked for any of this." "Nobody asks for this life," Matteo said quietly. "But you're in it now. And Luke." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've known him for years. I've seen him destroy men without blinking. But the way he looks at you..." The door opened suddenly, and Luke strode in. His presence filled the room immediately, dark and commanding. His eyes landed on Amelia first, softening for just a moment before hardening as he noticed Matteo. "Everything okay here?" His voice was deceptively calm. "Just checking on Miss Cruz, boss," Matteo replied, already backing toward the door. After Matteo left, Luke moved closer to Amelia. She could smell his expensive cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "You look pale," he observed, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek. Amelia stepped back. "I'm fine. Just confined." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You're protected. Is there a difference?" His jaw clenched. "Yes, the difference is you're alive." He moved to leave, but paused at the door. "I know you hate this, Amelia, but I won't apologize for keeping you safe." As the door closed behind him, Amelia sank into a plush armchair. Mateo's warning echoed in her mind. She was caught in Luke's world now, a world where love and danger were two sides of the same coin. And as she placed her hand over her still flat stomach, she wondered if she'd ever feel truly free again. The crack of gunfire shattered the silence of night, jolting Amelia from her sleep. Her heart hammered against her ribs as more shots rang out, closer this time. She clutched her stomach protectively, her other hand gripping the silk sheets of the bed Luke had given her. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Before she could move, the door burst open, and Luke filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking out the light from the corridor. His usual perfectly pressed suit was gone, replaced by a black t-shirt that showed the gun holster strapped across his chest. Even in the dim light, she could see the dangerous glint in his eyes. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice hard as steel. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Amelia's throat felt dry. "What's happening?" Another burst of gunfire made her flinch. Luke's expression darkened, but when his eyes fell to where her hands protected her stomach, something shifted in his face. For a split second, she saw past the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss to the man beneath the one who'd touched her so tenderly that night weeks ago. "Nothing you need to worry about, Kara." His voice was softer now, but no less commanding. "Just some business I need to handle." She heard shouting outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Luke's jaw clenched, and his hand tightened on his gun. "Remember what I said. Lock the door." Before she could respond, he was gone, closing the door behind him. Amelia scrambled out of bed, her legs shaking as she turned the lock. The sounds of violence grew louder, men shouting in Italian, more gunshots, the thud of bodies hitting walls or floors. She pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her hands never left her stomach, where their child grew, protected by nothing but her own flesh, and Luke's savage determination to keep them safe. The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of Luke's world, the world she was now part of, whether she wanted to be or not. And the scariest part? A piece of her felt safer knowing he was out there, dealing with whatever threat had dared to come near her and their unborn child. The gunshots echoed through the mansion like thunder. Amelia pressed herself against the bedroom wall, her hands instinctively covering her stomach. Through the window, shadows moved across the manicured lawn, and more shots pierced the night. The door burst open. Luke stood there, gun in hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "Stay here," he commanded. "Don't move until I come back." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the sounds of violence. Shouts and crashes filtered up from downstairs, punctuated by the sharp crack of gunfire. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest as she heard heavy footsteps running through the halls. Then came the screams. She crept to the door, knowing she should stay put but unable to fight her curiosity. Through the crack, she saw Luke's men dragging someone past her room. Blood trailed across the expensive carpet. "Please," the man begged. "We didn't know." His pleas cut off with a sickening thud. Amelia jumped back from the door, her hand pressed to her mouth. Luke's voice carried through the halls, low and deadly. "Check every room. If you find another one, shoot them." More gunshots, more screams. Amelia sank to the floor, trembling. This wasn't the world of fancy cars and designer suits she'd glimpsed as a maid. This was the real underbelly of Luke's empire, brutal, bloody, and merciless. An hour passed before silence finally fell. The door opened, and Luke stepped in. His white shirt was splattered with red, his knuckles raw. But his eyes, when they found her, held something almost gentle. "It's done," he said simply. "You're safe." Amelia stared at him, seeing both the monster who'd just orchestrated a massacre and the man who'd touched her so tenderly that one night. "Are we?" she whispered. "Will we ever be truly safe?" Luke crossed the room and knelt before her. His blood-stained hand reached out but stopped short of touching her face. "As long as I'm breathing," he said, "nothing will harm you or our child. I promise you that." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they sent a chill down her spine. Because now she understood exactly what that promise meant, and the violence it would take to keep it. Amelia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luke's private wing, watching rain streak down the glass. The luxury surrounding her felt more like a prison with each passing day. Crystal vases, Italian marble floors, and priceless artwork couldn't mask the constant presence of armed men outside her door. Her hand drifted to her still flat stomach. Even through the thick sweater she wore, her skin tingled at the reminder of what grew inside her, the heir to Luke's empire. The thought made her throat tight. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. His footsteps. Amelia would know them anywhere. Her heart quickened, betraying her determination to stay indifferent. The door opened without a knock. "Have you eaten?" Luke's deep voice filled the room. She didn't turn around. "Yes." He moved closer, his reflection appearing in the window beside hers. Even without looking directly at him, she could feel the power radiating from his presence. He wore one of his perfectly tailored black suits, the kind that made him look both elegant and dangerous. "The doctor will be here tomorrow." His tone was clipped, businesslike. "I expect you to cooperate fully." Amelia finally turned to face him, anger flaring in her chest. "Do I have a choice?" Something flickered in his dark eyes, a crack in his cold facade. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of the man who had held her that night, whose touch had been anything but businesslike. "No," he said softly, dangerously. "You don't." He stepped closer, and Amelia's back pressed against the cool glass. The space between them crackled with tension. "This isn't fair," she whispered, hating how her voice trembled. "You can't keep me locked up here like this." "I can, and I will." His hand came up to her face, fingers barely grazing her cheek. "You're carrying my child. That makes you mine to protect." The touch sent shivers down her spine, and she hated herself for wanting more. "Is that all I am to you? A vessel for your heir?" Luke's jaw clenched. Instead of answering, he dropped his hand and took a step back, creating distance between them. But his eyes never left hers, dark and intense, with something that looked almost like pain. "Get some rest," he ordered, turning away. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As he walked toward the door, Amelia felt tears burning behind her eyes. She was trapped in this gilded cage with a man who could make her body sing with a single touch, yet treated her like a precious but ultimately disposable asset. The door clicked shut behind him, and Amelia pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching his reflection disappear. Outside, the rain continued to fall, matching the tears that finally slipped down her cheeks. Amelia sat by the window of her gilded prison, watching the sun sink behind the mansion's iron gates. The room Luke had given her was beautiful, all cream silks and polished wood, but it felt hollow, empty like her heart. She pressed her hand against her still flat stomach, wondering how something so small could change everything so completely. A knock at the door made her jump. One of Luke's men entered with her dinner tray, setting it down without a word before leaving. The silence that followed was deafening. She missed the bustling energy of working downstairs, the chatter of other maids, even the tension of trying to avoid Luke's gaze. Now, avoiding him was impossible. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. She picked at her food, remembering how his hands had felt on her skin that night. The memory was both sweet and bitter, like dark chocolate melting on her tongue. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel his touch, hear his breath, taste his, "Are you not hungry?" His voice startled her. Luke stood in the doorway, filling it with his presence. He wore a black suit that made his eyes look darker, more dangerous. But there was something else there too, something that made her heart skip. "I'm fine," she said quietly, hating how her voice trembled. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of her chair. "You need to eat. For the baby. The baby. Always the baby. Never for her. Never because I know my duties," she said, more sharply than she intended. Something flickered across his face. Hurt? Anger? She couldn't tell anymore. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek before dropping back to his side. "Your safety," he said, his voice low and intense, "is paramount. No harm will come to you or the child. I won't allow it." Amelia looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who had held her that night, who had whispered her name like a prayer. But his expression was unreadable, a mask of cold authority. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the growing ache in her chest. She watched his retreating back until he disappeared, taking with him the warmth she'd briefly felt in his presence. The room felt colder now, larger, lonelier. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her heart that seemed to scatter every time he came near. She was trapped in his world, bound by the life growing inside her, and falling harder for a man who seemed determined to keep her at arm's length. Outside, the sun had completely set, leaving only darkness and the faint glow of security lights. Somewhere in this massive house, Luke was probably working, planning, protecting his empire. And here she sat, protected and imprisoned, loved and ignored. So close to him, yet worlds apart. Through the ornate windows of the mansion, Amelia watched as Luke's black SUV disappeared down the winding driveway. Her fingers traced patterns on the cool glass, her other hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Something felt off today. The air was patterns, too thick. The silence, too heavy. Miss Cruz. Marco, one of Luke's most trusted guards, appeared behind her. His face was stone, but his eyes held concern. "Mr. Moretti wants you to stay in your room until he returns. We've received some concerning information." Amelia's heart skipped. After weeks of living in Luke's world, she'd learned to read between the lines. What kind of information? "There's talk of a new faction making moves against the family." Marco's hand rested on his concealed weapon. Better safe than sorry. The word family made her stomach clench. Was that what she was now? Part of Luke's family? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "How long will he be gone?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "A few hours at most. We have men stationed at every entrance. You'll be safe here." Safe. The word had taken on new meaning since that night with Luke. Since the pregnancy test. Since everything changed. Amelia nodded and retreated to her room, no longer the servants' quarters, but a luxurious suite that still felt foreign to her. The silk sheets and crystal chandeliers were a constant reminder of how far she'd strayed from her simple life as a maid. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the footsteps of guards patrolling outside. The mansion felt different without Luke's commanding presence. more vulnerable somehow. Despite everything, despite his cold exterior and violent nature, she'd grown accustomed to the security his presence provided. "Please come back soon," she whispered to the empty room, surprising herself with the sincerity of the words. The tension in the mansion peaked as Amelia overheard Luke's men whispering that the rival families are getting restless and questioning Luke's judgment because the girl, Amelia divided by the pregnancy, was a weakness they can exploit. Luke entered, his jaw set, and ordered Amelia to stay in this room until further notice. When she confronted him, realizing, "They're coming for you, because of me," he only replied with a clipped whisper, "They won't touch you," before leaving her isolated. After a sleepless night of distant chaos, Luke commanded her to get up and pack. The mansion isn't secure enough anymore. He drove her to a hidden modern fortress, a private property, known only to his most trusted men. Inside the safe house, Luke ordered her, "Don't leave the grounds, for any reason." Despite the isolation, Amelia noted Luke's small, tender checks on her and the baby. However, his men later warned her that the enemies wanted to destroy everything he's built. "And now that includes you and the baby." When she pressed Luke for answers, he admitted, "Someone in my organization can't be trusted. Until I know who, you stay here where I can protect you." She was now fully aware that the baby was both her blessing and a curse, a tie to a man who could either save her or be her downfall. Luke stepped closer to Amelia in the garden, his usual edge gone. He admitted, "The gardens aren't safe after dark," but promised, "You're safe with me, Amelia. I promise you." She leaned into his touch, caught between the fear of the monster and the want of the man who acted as her protector and captor. The next major complication arrived when Luke was forced to meet with rival Mafia boss Dante Romano in his study. Dante's gaze lingered on Amelia, calling her the Maid who captured Moretti's attention. Luke warned him, "She's carrying my child. That's all you need to know." But Dante saw her as a strategic weakness, stating, "A man with something to lose is a man who can be manipulated." As Dante tried to persuade Luke to join forces, he continually emphasized the vulnerability Luke's new responsibilities, the baby, created. Luke adamantly refused the alliance, and after Dante left, he ordered Amelia to her room, warning her, "Trust no one, not even the staff you know." Amelia realized she had become a central piece and a target in their deadly game. Amelia's anxiety intensified in the safe house where Luke's men were everywhere, their eyes watchful. She noticed his small, tender gestures, like ensuring she ate, which confused her. Separately, one of Luke's men, Marco, cornered her to warn her that loyalty can be bought. Even those closest to Luke might have other interests, confirming her fear that a traitor was operating within Luke's circle and that the danger was internal as well as external. Later, she overheard Luke confirming the information. "Someone's been feeding information to Romano. It's someone close, very close." The confrontation happened the next morning. Amelia was heading to breakfast when she heard the commotion. In the main hall, Luke had Marco pinned against the wall, a gun pressed to his throat. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Luke's voice was terrifyingly calm. Marco's face was pale. "Boss, please, how much did Romano pay you?" Amelia wanted to look away, but she couldn't move. She watched as Luke's men dragged Marco away, his pleas echoing through the halls. Luke stood there, his expression carved from stone, before turning to meet her gaze. In that moment, Amelia saw him clearly, not the man who touched her so gently at night, but the ruthless mafia boss who commanded fear and loyalty through violence. The line between protector and monster blurred before her eyes. "Go back to your room, Amelia," he said softly, but his eyes were still cold. "You don't need to see this." She backed away, her heart pounding. The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the mansion as she closed her door. And she knew that the man she thought she knew was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across Amelia's bed as she lay awake, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. The events from earlier played on repeat, in her mind Marco's pleading, Luke's cold efficiency, the sickening crack of bone against marble. She should have been more horrified, should have been planning her escape. Instead, her thoughts kept drifting to the way Luke had looked at her afterward, his dark eyes seeking hers as if searching for judgment or fear. "You shouldn't have seen that," he'd said, his voice carrying an edge of regret she'd never heard before. Amelia rolled onto her side, pulling the silk sheets tighter around her shoulders. The luxury of her surroundings felt at odds with the brutality she'd witnessed. Everything in Luke's world was like that, beautiful on the surface, deadly underneath. A soft knock at her door made her heart jump. "Come in," she called out, already knowing who it would be. Only one person checked on her this late. Luke entered, his presence filling the room like a shadow. He'd changed from his blood-spattered suit into a clean black shirt and slacks, but the dangerous energy still rolled off him in waves. "You should be sleeping," he said, keeping his distance. Amelia sat up, drawing her knees to her chest. "How can I?" After what happened, Marco was a threat. His jaw tightened. "To you, to our child." The way he said "our" sent a shiver down her spine. She watched as he moved closer, his steps measured and careful, like a predator trying not to frighten its prey. "Is that what I am now?" she whispered. "A reason for you to kill people?" Luke stopped at the edge of her bed, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You're the reason I protect what's mine, Amelia. There's a difference." She knew there wasn't, not really, but as she looked up at him, at the man who could order death with a nod, but checked on her every night with such careful attention, she realized she was starting to understand him. And that understanding terrified her more than his violence ever could. Amelia lay in her bed, the silk sheets doing little to comfort her racing thoughts. The memory of Marco's betrayal and Luke's swift, brutal response played over and over in her mind. Every shadow in her room seemed to hide another potential threat, another person who might turn against them. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Come in!" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke entered, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway. Even in the dim light, she could see the tension in his jaw, the coldness in his eyes that had been there since Marco's betrayal. He moved like a predator, graceful but dangerous, as he approached her bed. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice low and controlled. "It's not good for the baby when you're stressed." Amelia's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "How can I sleep after what happened?" Marco made his choice. Luke's words were clipped, final. He won't be a problem anymore. A shiver ran down her spine. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Luke's eyes softened slightly as they met hers. "Everything I do, every life I take, every threat I eliminate, it's all to keep you safe." He sat on the edge of her bed, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "You and our child are all that matters now. Sometimes your protection feels like a prison," Amelia whispered, though she found herself leaning toward him, drawn to his presence despite her fear. "The world I live in doesn't allow for half measures," he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, at odds with the violence she knew those hands were capable of. "I learned long ago that trust is a luxury I can't afford. Everyone wants something: power, money, control. Everyone except you." Amelia's breath caught in her throat as his hand lingered on her cheek. "What do you want from me, Luke?" His dark eyes searched her face. "I want you to understand that you're mine to protect, mine to keep safe. No one will ever harm you or our child, not while I draw breath." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but instead, it sent warmth spreading through her chest. She knew there was no escape from this man or his world, and maybe, deep down, she didn't want one. "I understand," she said softly, and she did. This was her life now, bound to a man who could be both monster and protector, whose love was as dangerous as his enemies. Luke stood, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest," he commanded, but his voice was gentler than before. "I'll be close if you need me." As he left, Amelia sank back into her pillows, knowing that while she might be safer than ever before, she'd never truly be free again. And somehow, that thought wasn't as terrifying as it should have been. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Amelia's room, casting soft shadows across the luxurious space that still didn't feel like home. Her hand rested on her slightly swollen belly as she sat in the window seat, watching Luke's men patrol the grounds below. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her turn. She knew those steps by now, measured, purposeful, and belonging to the most dangerous man she'd ever known. Luke appeared in the doorway, his dark suit impeccable as always. But there was something different in his eyes when they fell on her. The coldness that usually masked his features softened, just slightly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his deep voice quieter than usual. Amelia shifted, still unused to this gentler version of him. "We're fine," she said, her hand unconsciously protective over her stomach. "The morning sickness is better." He crossed the room in long strides, coming to stand near her. His presence still made her heart race, but now it wasn't just from fear. "The doctor will be here this afternoon," he said, his hand hesitating before reaching out to touch her shoulder. "I've cleared my schedule to attend." The gesture surprised her. 3 weeks ago, he would have simply ordered her to see the doctor and gone about his business. But since Marco's betrayal, something had changed. Luke was still the ruthless Mafia boss who commanded fear and respect. But with her, he showed glimpses of someone else. "You don't have to," she said softly, even though part of her wanted him there. His jaw tightened. "I want to be there." The words came out almost like a confession, rough around the edges, as if he wasn't used to expressing such things. Amelia looked up at him, studying the face that had haunted her dreams since that first night together. The face that could turn cold and cruel in an instant, but now looked at her with something close to tenderness. "Thank you," she whispered, and saw his expression shift, just slightly, at her gratitude. He nodded once, his hand lingering on her shoulder before pulling away. "I need to handle some business first," he said, his voice taking on that harder edge she knew meant violence was coming. "Stay inside today. Marco's people are still out there." The reminder of the betrayal made Amelia shiver. She'd seen what Luke had done to Marco, but the man's network was vast, and their threats still echoed in the halls of this fortress-like house. "I understand," she said, because she did now. She understood the violence, the control, the protection. It was all tied together in this dangerous world she'd fallen into. Luke turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Amelia," he said, not looking back at her, "you're safe here, with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, because safe meant something different in Luke's world. It meant blood and bullets and bodies. It meant his complete control and absolute protection. And somehow, despite everything she'd seen, Amelia believed him. Amelia stood by the window of her room in Luke's safe house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Her hand rested on her stomach, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. The baby, their baby, was a constant reminder of how her life had changed. Heavy footsteps in the hallway made her heart skip. She knew those steps, had learned to recognize them among all others. Luke appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a shadow. "How are you feeling?" His voice was low, careful. It was the voice he used only with her, different from the cold commands he gave his men. "I'm fine." Amelia turned to face him, catching the way his eyes softened when they fell to her stomach. These moments, these glimpses of tenderness made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Luke crossed the room in long strides, closing the distance between them. His hand reached out, hovering over her stomach before touching it gently. The gesture was so intimate it made her breath catch. "The doctor will be here tomorrow," he said. "I want to make sure everything's progressing well." Amelia nodded, too aware of his proximity, of the heat radiating from his body. "You don't have to check on me so often. I know you're busy with—" She stopped, not wanting to mention the violence that consumed his world. His eyes darkened. "You're my priority now." His thumb stroked her cheek, the touch surprisingly gentle for hands that had caused so much destruction. "Both of you are." Before she could respond, he pulled her against him, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that was both possessive and tender. Amelia melted into him, her body betraying her mind's reservations. His arms tightened around her, one hand tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, his eyes were intense, almost feral. "You're mine now, Amelia. No one can take you from me." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Fear or desire, she couldn't tell anymore. Maybe with Luke, they were the same thing. She watched him leave, his words echoing in her mind. She was his now, caught in a world of darkness and violence, yet protected by the most dangerous man in it. And despite everything she knew about him, or perhaps because of it, she was falling deeper under his spell. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mansion's garden as Amelia settled onto a stone bench. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, though she knew life grew within. The carefully tended roses around her seemed to mock the darkness of her situation with their delicate beauty. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, and she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The garden had become her sanctuary over the past weeks, the only place where she could pretend she wasn't trapped in Luke's dangerous world. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Luke's deep voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, his dark suit impeccable as always, his presence commanding even in the peaceful garden setting. His eyes, usually cold and distant, held something different when they met hers, something that made her breath catch. "I needed some air," Amelia said, her voice soft but steady. "Your men are watching me anyway. They always are." Luke moved closer, and Amelia caught the scent of his expensive cologne. "They watch because I order them to keep you safe." He paused, his jaw tightening. "You understand nothing of the dangers you face." "Then help me understand," she challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. "Am I just a pawn to you, a way to secure your position?" His expression darkened, and for a moment, Amelia saw the dangerous man others feared. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled, almost gentle. "You think I keep you here just for politics? What else am I supposed to think?" Amelia stood, needing to feel less vulnerable under his intense gaze. "You barely speak to me unless it's to give orders. You keep me locked away like something precious that needs protection." He finished for her, stepping closer. The air between them crackled with tension. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest as Luke reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "You're carrying my child," he said, his voice low and possessive. But that's not the only reason I keep you close, Amelia. Before she could respond, the moment was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. Luke dropped his hand and stepped back, his walls slamming back into place. One of his men appeared, speaking in rapid Italian. Luke's expression hardened as he listened. "Go inside," he ordered Amelia, all tenderness gone. "Now." Amelia hurried back toward the mansion, her mind spinning. In that brief moment in the garden, she'd glimpsed something real beneath Luke's cold exterior, something that both thrilled and terrified her. But as she glanced back at his rigid form, now deep in conversation with his man, she wondered if she'd imagined it all. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as Amelia walked among the perfectly manicured roses. Her hand rested on her growing belly, a habit she'd developed over the past few weeks. The peaceful setting was a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. A figure appeared at the garden entrance. Giovanni, one of Luke's most trusted men. His presence made her stomach tighten. He wasn't like the other guards. There was something calculating in his eyes that reminded her too much of Luke. "Miss Cruz," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "May I join you?" Amelia nodded, though everything in her wanted to run. Giovanni fell into step beside her, his expensive suit out of place among the flowers. "You understand what you've gotten yourself into, don't you?" he asked, after a moment of silence. "This isn't just about carrying Luke's child. This is about loyalty." "I'm loyal to Luke," Amelia said quietly. But Giovanni's laugh made her flinch. "Are you? Or are you just scared?" He stopped walking, forcing her to face him. "Our enemies are circling like sharks, Miss Cruz. They smell weakness. And you? You're either our greatest strength or our biggest vulnerability." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. "What do you want from me? Prove yourself. Show Luke that you understand what this life means, that you're willing to do whatever it takes to protect what's his." Giovanni's eyes flickered to her stomach. "What's yours?" Later that evening, Amelia heard Luke's familiar footsteps approaching her room. Her heart raced as he entered, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. "Giovanni spoke to you," he said. It wasn't a question. Amelia met his gaze, finding both ice and fire there. "Yes." "And?" She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect the baby." Something shifted in Luke's expression, a softening around his eyes that made her breath catch. In 2 quick strides, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. His embrace was possessive, protective, threatening, and comforting all at once. "Good," he murmured against her hair, "because this is a dangerous game, and you're in it now." Amelia closed her eyes, letting herself sink into his warmth, even as his words sent a chill down her spine. She was caught in his web now, trapped between desire and danger, and there was no way out. The silence in the mansion was deafening. Amelia stood by the window of her room, one hand resting on her growing belly, as she watched Luke's men patrol the grounds below. The past few days had felt different, tenser, if that was even possible. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and she could feel it in her bones. Luke hadn't visited her in 3 days. Usually, even at his busiest, he would at least check on her once a day, his dark eyes softening for just a moment when they fell on her stomach. But now, all she heard were hushed conversations in hallways and the constant movement of armed men through the estate. A knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. It was Sophia, one of the few staff members she was allowed to interact with. The woman's face was pinched with worry. "Miss Cruz, Mr. Moretti wants you to stay in your room today. All day." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "Why? What's happening?" Sophia just shook her head, already backing toward the door. "Just Stay inside, please. Lock the door behind me." After Sophia left, Amelia did as she was told, the click of the lock echoing in the empty room. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Whatever was happening, it had everyone on edge. Through the window, she could see more of Luke's men taking positions around the property. Their movements were precise, practiced like soldiers, preparing for battle. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anxiety, and she rubbed her belly soothingly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince the baby or herself. "Your father won't let anything happen to us." The words felt strange on her tongue. Your father, Luke Moretti, the ruthless mafia boss who had claimed her as his own, who had turned her world upside down with one night of passion. The man who terrified her as much as he drew her in, like a moth to a deadly flame. She moved away from the window, suddenly feeling too exposed. The luxury of her prison, because that's what it was, no matter how gilded, felt suffocating. Something was coming, and all she could do was wait. The dim light of evening cast long shadows across the mansion's marble floors as Amelia made her way through the quiet hallway. Her footsteps echoed softly, matching the nervous beating of her heart. She hadn't meant to overhear the conversation, but Luke's voice, harsh and cold, had carried through the partially open door of his study. "Someone's feeding information to the Romanos," Luke said, his tone deadly quiet. "Find out who it is and bring them to me." Amelia froze, pressing herself against the wall. Her hand instinctively moved to her growing belly. Protective. "Boss, it has to be someone close," his man replied. "The information they have, it's too detailed." "Then look closer. Check everyone, even our own people." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Amelia knew what happened to traitors in Luke's world. She'd seen it firsthand with Marco. As she tried to slip away unnoticed, the floor creaked beneath her feet. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. Footsteps approached the door, and before she could move, Luke appeared in the doorway, his dark eyes finding her immediately. "Amelia." His voice was ice. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed hard. "I was just passing by. I didn't mean to." "Come inside." It wasn't a request. The study was warm, but Amelia felt cold, as Luke dismissed his man with a sharp nod. When they were alone, he moved closer, towering over her. His presence filled the room, suffocating. "What did you hear?" he demanded. "Someone's betraying you," she whispered. Again, Luke's jaw tightened. He turned away, walking to the window. The setting sun cast an orange glow across his sharp features, softening them for just a moment. "This is my world, Amelia," he said finally. "Everyone's a potential enemy, even those closest to me." "Even me?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. He turned back to her, his eyes dark, with something that looked like pain. In 3 swift steps, he crossed the room and gripped her arms, pulling her close. "You're different," he growled. "You're carrying my child. You're mine." But his words felt hollow, desperate. Amelia could feel him pulling away emotionally even as he held her physically closer. The wall around his heart seemed to grow higher with each passing day. Later that night, after another tense confrontation with one of his men, Luke came to her room. His presence was like a storm, dark and threatening. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. "My enemies are getting closer," he murmured against her hair. "They think they can take what's mine." His grip tightened. "You're mine, Amelia, and no one will take you from me." His kiss was fierce, possessive, stealing her breath and her thoughts. Amelia melted into him, even as her mind screamed warnings. This was the man who killed without mercy, who ruled through fear, but his touch set her on fire. And when he kissed her like this, she couldn't remember why she should be afraid. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. Before she could question it, he was gone, leaving her alone with the taste of danger on her lips and the weight of uncertainty in her heart. Amelia stood in the darkness of her room, one hand pressed to her lips, the other cradling her stomach. She was falling for a monster, a man who could never truly let anyone in, but as she felt the first flutter of movement from their child, she wondered if even monsters could learn to love. The moonlight cast long shadows across Amelia's room as she stood at the window, one hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. The estate sprawled before her like a beautiful prison, its manicured gardens and high walls a constant reminder of her gilded cage. She couldn't sleep, not with the weight of everything pressing down on her. Luke's warnings, the whispers of betrayal, the constant fear that seemed to follow her like a shadow. The baby shifted inside her, a gentle flutter that made her heart ache with both love and worry. A movement caught her eye in the darkness below. One of Luke's men patrolled the grounds, his gun visible even from this distance. They were everywhere now, watching, waiting, protecting her, Luke would say. But sometimes protection felt an awful lot like possession. "You should be sleeping." Luke's voice came from behind her, low and commanding. Amelia's heart jumped, but she didn't turn around. She'd gotten used to the way he appeared silently, like a ghost in the night. "I can't." His footsteps were quiet on the carpet as he approached. She could feel his presence, solid and overwhelming, before his hand came to rest on her shoulder. His touch was gentle, at odds with the ruthless man she knew him to be. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything," she whispered. "Nothing." She finally turned to face him, finding his dark eyes fixed on her with that intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. "How much longer can this go on, Luke?" His jaw tightened. "As long as it takes to keep you safe. And what about you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Who keeps you safe?" Something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability perhaps, or pain. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar cold mask. "I don't need protection, Amelia. I am the danger." He pulled her closer, one hand sliding to rest protectively over her belly. The gesture was possessive, tender, and threatening all at once, just like everything else about him. "You're exhausted," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Come back to bed." Amelia let him guide her away from the window, knowing there was no use arguing. This was her life now caught between Luke's tenderness and his violence, between his protection and his control. As she lay down, his large frame settling beside her, she wondered if she'd ever find peace in this dangerous world he'd pulled her into. But as his arm wrapped around her, holding her close, she realized that maybe peace wasn't what she wanted anymore. Maybe what she wanted was him, despite everything he was, everything he'd done. And that terrified her more than any threat that lurked in the darkness outside. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Luke led Amelia into his private study. His steps were measured, deliberate. But there was something different about him today, a heaviness that seemed to weigh on his broad shoulders. Amelia's heart raced as he closed the door behind them. She'd grown used to his cold demeanor, his calculated control. But there was something in his eyes now that made her breath catch. "Sit," he said, his voice softer than usual. She perched on the edge of a leather armchair, watching as he paced before the window. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "My enemies," he finally said, his jaw tight. "They're closing in, the threats. They've never been this serious before." Amelia's hands trembled in her lap. She'd never heard him admit to any kind of weakness, any vulnerability. Yet here he was, his usual mask of indifference, cracking just enough for her to see the storm beneath. "I've dealt with threats before," he continued, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I've eliminated every enemy who's ever crossed my path. But now..." He stopped, his fists clenching at his sides. "Now I have something to lose." The words hung heavy in the air. Amelia's throat tightened as she watched this dangerous man, this monster who'd killed without remorse, struggle with emotions she'd never thought him capable of feeling. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice rough. "You and the baby. You're the only things I've ever allowed myself to care about. The only weakness I can't afford, but can't let go of either." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. She stood, drawn to him like a moth to flame, even knowing how dangerous that attraction could be. "Luke." He crossed the room in 2 swift strides, pulling her into his arms. His embrace was fierce, possessive, yet gentler than she'd ever felt from him. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous, something uniquely him. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. "I'll burn this whole city to the ground if I have to. No one will touch what's mine." Amelia nodded silently, her heart pounding with a mixture of love and fear. She knew she should be terrified of his words, of the violence they promised. Instead, she found herself clinging tighter to him, accepting both the monster and the man. They stood there for a long time, the afternoon light fading around them. In that moment, Amelia understood that there was no going back. She was bound to him now, not just by the child she carried, but by something deeper, something both beautiful and terrifying. His arms tightened around her, and she knew that whatever came next, whatever dangers they faced, this was where she belonged, in the embrace of a man who would destroy the world to keep her safe. The air in the mansion crackled with tension. Amelia stood at her bedroom window, one hand resting on her growing belly as she watched Luke's men move with urgent purpose across the grounds below. Their usual disciplined formations had given way to something more frantic, more desperate. She'd learned to read the signs over the past months. The way Luke's jaw clenched when he received certain phone calls, the hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room, the increased security presence that made the mansion feel more like a fortress with each passing day. Something was coming, something big. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Luke stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. His dark eyes swept over her, lingering on her stomach before meeting her gaze. Gone was the cold mask he usually wore. In its place was something raw, almost primitive. "Pack a bag," he said, his voice low and rough. "Only what you need." Amelia's heart jumped. "What's happening?" "They're making their move." Luke crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "I won't let them near you, or our child." The possessiveness in his touch made her shiver. His thumbs traced small circles on her skin, a gesture that felt both protective and threatening. This was the paradox of Luke Moretti, the man who could order deaths without blinking, yet touch her with such gentleness. "How bad is it?" she whispered. "Bad enough that I'm moving you tonight." His grip tightened. "I've eliminated most of the threats, but there's still a snake in my garden. Someone close, someone who knows too much." Fear coiled in Amelia's stomach. She'd seen what happened to traitors in Luke's world. The memory of Marco's fate still haunted her dreams. "Trust no one but me," Luke continued, his face inches from hers. "Not my men, not the staff. No one." Amelia nodded, trapped in his intense gaze. "I understand." His hand slid to her neck, thumb brushing her jawline. "Good girl," he murmured, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, his mask sliding back into place. "Be ready in 30 minutes. As he turned to leave, Amelia called out, "Luke?" He paused at the doorway. "Will it ever end? This life of looking over our shoulders?" His silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his words sent chills down her spine. "No, but I'll burn this city to the ground before I let anyone take you from me." He left her then, alone with the weight of his promise and the knowledge that their world was about to explode into chaos. The air in the mansion crackled with tension. Amelia stood in Luke's study, her heart pounding against her ribs as she watched him pace like a caged animal. His jaw was set, eyes dark with barely contained fury. "Bring him in," Luke commanded, his voice cutting through the silence. Two of his men dragged in Antonio, one of Luke's most trusted advisors. His face was already bloodied, but his eyes held defiance. Amelia pressed herself against the wall, one hand protectively covering her stomach. "You thought you could betray me." Luke's voice was deadly quiet. "That you could sell information to my enemies and I wouldn't find out?" Antonio spat blood onto the expensive carpet. "You've grown weak, Moretti. That woman—" He jerked his head toward Amelia. "She's made you soft." Luke moved with lightning speed. His fist connected with Antonio's jaw, the crack echoing through the room. Amelia flinched, but couldn't look away. "Weak?" Luke grabbed Antonio's throat. "Let me show you exactly how weak I am." What followed was a display of violence that made Amelia's blood run cold. Luke was ruthless, methodical in his brutality. She watched as he systematically broke the man who had dared to cross him, each blow a message to anyone who might think of challenging his authority. When it was over, Luke stood over Antonio's lifeless body, his knuckles bloodied. He turned to his men. "Clean this up and spread the word. This is what happens to traitors." The room cleared quickly, leaving Amelia alone with Luke. He approached her slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. His shirt was spattered with blood, but his eyes had softened when they landed on her. "You're trembling," he observed, reaching out to touch her cheek. Amelia couldn't help leaning into his touch, despite what she'd just witnessed. "How can you be so different with me?" she whispered. Luke pulled her against him, one hand splaying possessively over her stomach. "This world is mine," he growled against her ear, "and no one, not even you, can take that from me. You are mine." Amelia closed her eyes, feeling both trapped and protected in his embrace. The man who had just shown such savage violence was now holding her like she was made of glass. It terrified her how much she needed him, how safe she felt in the arms of someone so dangerous. "I understand," she whispered. And she did. This was his world, brutal, unforgiving, and now, irrevocably, hers too. The heavy oak doors of Luke's private office swung shut with an ominous thud. Dante Romano lounged in the leather chair across from Luke's desk, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. Everything about him exuded a dangerous charm, from his perfectly tailored suit to his easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I hear congratulations are in order," Dante said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. "A baby on the way. With the maid, no less." He paused, studying Luke's face. "How unexpected." Luke's expression remained carved from stone, but his fingers tightened imperceptibly around his crystal tumbler. "My personal life isn't up for discussion, Romano." "Oh, but it is." Dante leaned forward, dropping all pretense of casualness. "Everything's up for discussion when it comes to power in this city. And you've just handed your enemies the perfect weakness. If you're here to make threats, Luke began, his voice deadly quiet. Threats? Dante's laugh was hollow. I'm here to offer protection, an alliance. After all, what's family for? The word family hung between them like poison. Luke's jaw clenched. We both know your idea of family loyalty, Romano. I haven't forgotten what happened to your own brother. Ancient history. Dante waved his hand dismissively, but his eyes hardened. Times are changing, Moretti. The old guard is dying out. New alliances need to be formed. And that pretty little maid of yours? She's made you vulnerable. My protection could ensure nothing. Unfortunate happens to her or your heir. Luke stood slowly, his movements controlled but radiating danger. Let me be clear, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that could freeze hell itself. If you so much as look in Amelia's direction, what I did to your brother will seem merciful in comparison. Dante's smile never wavered, but something dark flickered in his eyes. Such passion, Moretti. It doesn't suit you. He rose smoothly from his chair. Consider my offer. You have until the end of the week. After that. He shrugged elegantly. Well, let's just say I won't be the only one seeing opportunities in your domestic situation. As Dante moved to leave, he paused at the door. She really is lovely, your maid. It would be a shame if anything happened to her. The crystal tumbler in Luke's hand shattered, but Dante was already gone, leaving only the echo of his words and the scent of expensive cologne behind. Luke stared at his bleeding hand, watching the blood drip onto his pristine desk. In that moment, he knew the game had changed, and Amelia had just become the prize everyone would try to claim. His muscles tensed as cold fury settled in his chest. They would learn, all of them, exactly what happened to anyone who threatened what was his. The tension in Luke's private office was suffocating. Amelia stood in the corner, her hands clasped protectively over her growing belly as she watched the two most dangerous men in the city size each other up. Dante Romano lounged in the leather armchair across from Luke's desk, a lazy smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his cold eyes. So, Moretti, Dante drawled, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. You want peace? That's not like you. Luke's face remained impassive, but Amelia noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. Peace is good for business, he replied, his voice carrying that familiar edge of steel. But make no mistake, Romano, this isn't surrender. Dante's gaze flickered to Amelia, and something in his expression made her skin crawl. No, clearly not. You have new priorities now. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Luke's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly on his desk, and Amelia knew he was fighting the urge to reach for the gun she knew he kept there. The terms are simple, Luke continued, his voice deadly quiet. Your territory stays yours, mine stays mine. We work together against common enemies, but we don't interfere in each other's business. Dante's smile widened. And what guarantee do I have that you won't change your mind once your situation is more secure? His eyes lingered on Amelia again. The same guarantee I have that you won't try to take what's mine. Luke's words carried a clear threat. Mutual destruction. The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia held her breath, watching as the two men stared each other down. Finally, Dante stood, straightening his expensive suit. Very well, Moretti. You have your deal. He walked to the door, but paused before leaving. Give my congratulations to the mother-to-be. After Dante left, Luke remained seated for a long moment, his expression dark. When he finally looked at Amelia, his eyes were filled with a cold fury that made her shiver. This is only the start, he said, his voice low and dangerous. We fight, We win, or we die. There is no middle ground with men like Romano. Amelia wrapped her arms tighter around herself, understanding with crystal clarity that she was now caught in a game where the stakes weren't just life and death. They were about power, control, and survival. And Luke was playing to win, no matter the cost. Amelia stood by the window of her room, one hand resting on her slightly swollen belly as she watched Dante's car disappear down the long driveway. The meeting had left her shaken, though she couldn't quite explain why. Perhaps it was the calculating look in Dante's eyes, or the way Luke's jaw had tightened every time Dante glanced in her direction. The baby kicked, as if sensing her unease. She pressed her palm more firmly against her stomach, trying to calm both the child and herself. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, and she could see Luke's men positioned strategically around the property. Their presence was both comforting and suffocating. "You shouldn't stand so close to the window." Luke's voice came from behind her, making her jump. She turned to face him, taking in his rigid posture and the darkness in his eyes. The meeting. Did it go as planned? Luke moved closer, his steps measured and controlled. When he reached her, he placed his hand over hers on her belly. His touch, surprisingly gentle for someone who had just spent hours negotiating with one of the most dangerous men in the city. Luke tilted Amelia's chin up, his kiss a fierce, possessive claim. "I promise you, Amelia, you're mine to protect. Always." She accepted her place in his world, a life built on darkness but bound by an intense love. Months later, pregnant, Amelia was confronted by Sofia Castellano and Caterina Bellini, two stunning women from Luke's past who both warned her about the man she loved. Luke dismissed them, insisting to Amelia, "She means nothing. You're my future." But his heightened need for control made Amelia feel like a prisoner in a gilded cage. She confronted him, arguing, protection shouldn't feel like a prison, to which he emotionally confessed, "I would burn this whole fucking world down just to keep you safe. You're not my weakness, Amelia. You're my reason." The tension reached a peak following Marcello's ruthless execution for betrayal, and the disappearance of Giovanni, a trusted man turned traitor who knew about her pregnancy and their plans. Luke, revealing the betrayal with fear in his eyes, declared he was moving her tonight to a secret location, concluding, "This isn't a discussion, Amelia. No one can be trusted, except you." Just before he left to face an imminent attack, he confessed, "I'm the most dangerous thing in this world, and I'm yours." Amelia, in turn, whispered, "I love you, monster and all," as he ordered her to lock the door and await his return. "Monster and all," he repeated softly, before disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. Amelia stood in the shadows of Luke's office, watching him make his final preparations. Maps and documents littered his desk, each one a piece of the intricate plan he'd crafted to eliminate his enemies once and for all. Her hand instinctively moved to her growing belly, protecting their unborn child even as she watched the father prepare for war. Luke looked up, his dark eyes finding hers across the room. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm not leaving," Amelia replied firmly. "Not now." His jaw clenched, but something softened in his gaze. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "This ends tonight. All of it." The sound of gunfire erupted outside, and Luke's men burst through the door. "They're here, boss." Luke's expression hardened instantly, the tender moment forgotten. He pushed Amelia behind him, his body becoming a shield. "Get her to the safe room," he ordered one of his most trusted men. "No." Amelia grabbed his arm. "I need to know you'll come back." He turned to her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I always come back for what's mine." The battle that followed was brutal. From her position in the safe room, Amelia could hear the chaos, gunshots, screams, the sound of breaking glass. Her heart pounded with each explosion, every moment stretching into an eternity as she waited to know if Luke was alive or dead. Hours passed before the door finally opened. Luke stood there, blood splattered across his expensive suit, his knuckles raw. But he was alive. More than that, he was victorious. "It's done," he said simply, pulling her into his arms. "They're all dead. No one will ever threaten us again." Amelia pressed her face into his chest, inhaling his scent beneath the metallic tang of blood. "Promise me," she whispered. Luke tilted Amelia's chin up, his kiss a fierce, possessive claim. "I promise you, Amelia. You're mine to protect, always." Surrounded by the aftermath of violence, Amelia finally accepted her place in his world. A life built on darkness, but bound by an intense love. She was his, and he was hers. Months later, morning sunlight warmed Amelia as she stood on their private balcony, her hand resting on her growing belly. A constant reminder of the new life. Luke found her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his large hands covering hers. "You shouldn't be standing out here alone," he murmured, his protection, though suffocating, stemming from deep love. The estate was a fortress, even for her medical checkups. When he turned her to face him, his eyes intense, she admitted she sometimes remembered her old life, but wouldn't change their present. "You're mine now, Amelia. You and our child, and I protect what's mine." She touched his face, seeing the powerful man who ruled an empire look at her, like she was his salvation. As the sun set, Amelia watched from their bedroom window, the fear of the past months giving way to a dangerous, deep love. Luke's arms wrapped around her. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice softer than any other would hear it. She confessed that even though his world terrified her, she was happy, and her only fear was losing him. "That will never happen. You're mine, Amelia, forever. I'll burn down the whole world before I let anyone take you from me." He promised, his kiss fierce. The frightened maid was now his queen, carrying his child. Together, they walked onto the balcony, his arm protective and possessive. "Forever," she whispered. "Mine," Luke affirmed as darkness fell, their love forged in the most unlikely place. "Always mine." If you enjoyed the story of Amelia Cruz, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.